our communities are still suffering from centuries of all of those things happening. So we can't simply say, oh, we'll just wipe the slate clean and everything's, good to go. In 2020, Black people are still contending with the effects of chattel slavery. So it is not unfair to say that white people should still be, quote unquote, paying for the consequences of chattel slavery. If that makes sense. It's not just that, just because I'm born, when I was born and I'm alive today in 2020, that doesn't mean that I just magically am completely separated from the legacy of slavery in the United States. If that were the case, well then, okay, we could say reparations doesn't make any sense. But we know that that's not true. We know that almost everywhere we look, we see the effects of slavery and Jim Crow and, all of those things are still affecting us today.
Welcome to the Networking with Michelle podcast, the show dedicated to providing you with life strategies with a little bit of entrepreneur advice. Here we believe in the Jim Rohn quote, success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. Hey everyone, welcome to the Networking with Michelle show. I'm your host, Michelle Gomez, and we are on episode 9, Perspective of Black Lives. And today I have a beautiful guest by the name of Valerie Wade. She's the owner of Lynnfield Historical Consulting. And we had a refreshing conversation about Black women, protecting Black women, and what does intersectionality look like for us and how it affects us today. And one thing that has been on my mind lately is why are Black women ignored in history? Of course, we know about Martin Luther King, we know about Malcolm X, and we even know about Rosa Parks, right? But there's more women that are important to Black history. And my thing is, we got to hear, I feel like you have to hear these names to do the research. Lots of times people well, go read a book, go look it up. And I agree. And I do feel like I look it up, but I need to know what I'm looking for, right? Who do I need to read upon? Where do I start? And I think when you hear that name, that's when you know where to start. And so we talk about protecting Black women. When we had this conversation, there was crazy incidents that were going on. Rest in power, Oluwatoyin, who was at a Black Lives March, Black Lives Movement March in Florida. And unfortunately, she was kidnapped and died. And it's very sad because she was literally fighting, literally on the front lines. And then moments later, days later, she passed away because she was kidnapped, assaulted, and no one could find her. Also that week, there was incidents. I'm not even going to go into those details, but if you listen to the conversation, but we talk about why protecting Black women is real and why it's important. And people need to understand that. And I think we're at the reckoning where Black women are tired of explaining all of these things. So if you're one of those people that's tired of explaining, hopefully you can send this episode to someone and they can learn something, right? With your approval, of course, with your approval. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Valerie. Hey everyone, today's special guest is Valerie Wade of Lynnfield Consulting. Valerie, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. Well, I am a public historian and certified archivist based in Houston, Texas. My specialty is African American history and women's history, but I dabble in a whole lot of fields. And my overall purpose is to try to bring history to everyday people, to try to get people to understand that history connects all of us, and it's not just something reserved for people in, universities sort of tucked away in their offices. It really does sort of belong to all of us. And so I try to engage people through genealogy and different workshops and all kinds of things. So
I feel like you're a rare jewel, right? I just met you and I already know how special you are.
Oh, thank you.
How are you able to make this a career or business? Like, I feel like I loved history when I was in school, but I didn't want to be a professor. So how were you able to get to this point?
It's been kind of a weird journey, to be honest. When I went to college, I was the same. I didn't know that history could be, a profession. And then I became a Mellon Mays undergraduate research fellow, and that sort of opened up this whole idea of making the humanities a career path. I ended up going to graduate school for history, started a PhD program, didn't finish. That's another story, but I really, part of it was I really did want to connect with people like on the ground through history, and I wanted the work that I produced to be accessible to a wide range of people. So through that, I came, I'm trying to think back. I became an oral historian here in Houston, and things just kind of honestly took off from there. I just really realized there were these kind of gaps here and there in the way that history was experienced by everyday people, especially when I looked around and I saw all the gentrification happening. Not only in Houston, but just all over the country. And I saw how historic Black neighborhoods were just kind of being erased. And people were being told, like, oh, you shouldn't have a problem with this. There was nothing there, to begin with. So, having these cute little cafes and these nice apartments here, that's progress. And I'm like, nope, that's, as a historian, like, no, we don't do that. So, just kind of through seeing the things happening around me and thinking about sort of what I wanted to contribute to my community, that's how I came into this business. I said, I'm just going to start. People were asking me to help them with genealogy projects all over the place. And I said, well, obviously, some of the bigger online genealogy services were not serving our community kind of in the best ways, at the time. And that's just kind of where I decided to just take a leap. It's really just leap of faith every single day.
That's fascinating. So you said some of these bigger companies, they don't serve us. And we can say that across all industries, right? But I guess how do you come in and say, hey, this is why Black people are important, or this is why you need to expand your services and products to this demographic?
Well, I think that it's twofold. On one hand, the buying power in the Black community cannot be, overlooked. If you are a business and you want to fully serve as many clients as you can, I'm going to close this door. This is kind of bothering me. Sorry. If you want to serve as many clients as you possibly can, you don't ignore Black people. Just bottom line, simple math. You don't do that. So for me, it just seemed to make economic sense to try to point out the ways that companies and businesses that were engaging with history should pay more authentic attention, not just lip service, but authentic attention to a Black customer base. Then on the other hand, just from a sort of, I guess moral or ethical or just doing the right thing, it is just right to acknowledge all of the ways that Black Americans have contributed to this country's history. And I think that is something that lots of businesses are seeing now, with everything that's going on, with people being more aware of just the ways that companies interact with our communities, with all the protests and everything. You all of a sudden see everybody, Black Lives Matter, is everywhere, which is good in a lot of ways. But I hope that continues to build and go further, and it's not just lip service, as I said before. So I think it's twofold. It makes economic sense, and it's simply the right thing to do.
I love that. I think so. It's like, yes, Black Lives Matter, and then the Black dollar matters. And unfortunately, I think white people have to have that correlation to kind of oh yeah, what can we do? What can we? You're kind of scrambling, and it's like, diversity is important, and sometimes we have two definitions of diversity as far as Black and white people, but sometimes I wonder, maybe you can give me some insight. Like, I kind of wonder, like, what is going on in their heads when they're in that room, and then because we get into the context of slavery and these racial uprisings, and recently Tulsa, and I feel like white people don't want, not all, but white people don't want to acknowledge history. And this is funny because, as we're recording this, we're in between Juneteenth and July 4th.
I call this Juneteenth season. It's a whole season for me. I love some Juneteenth.
Give us some insight as to maybe why white people have a hard time acknowledging Black history?
Why white people have a hard time acknowledging Black history? I think that, so there's several ways I want to answer that question. I want to answer it on one hand in sort of the professional, sort of academic, this is what I have studied, this is what my experience teaches me sort of way. And then I want to answer in like real talk, like, Valerie from East Texas kind of way, those are not always the same. So on one hand, I think that, and of course I'm speaking generally, there are white people out there who really do their best to get it. They're really out there trying to get it and advocating the best that they can and everything. So I'm hoping that people understand I'm speaking in broad general strokes here. I think that white people have a hard time understanding history because this entire system, this Western civilization, from the time they are babies, teaches them that they are the center, that their experiences are universal, that the things that are important to them must, of course, be important to everyone else. And so there's just a kind of tunnel vision and narrow-mindedness that they have. And when confronted with an alternative way of knowing, an alternative way of sort of existing in the world, they either kind of sit back and say, well, I guess the way I was taught was wrong. Maybe I should read a little more. Or they go, oh no, like, this is like, they just completely balk at the idea. That's the way that they were taught history. It's not the complete story. So I think that they have a hard time understanding history and confronting history because it involves changing the entire way that they were taught to see the world, right? So if you grow up, for instance, you mentioned that we're in this time between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. If, as the average white American, you are told that the United States flag means a certain thing, and you are told that Independence Day means a certain thing, and you are told, you grow up seeing, cowboys and Indians, the Indians are the bad guys and the cowboys are the good guys. Like, you sort of grow up thinking this certain narrative is true. And why would you question this narrative? Everyone around you seems to agree on it. There seems to be a very clear sort of, good guy, bad guy, freedom, independence, monarchy, democracy. You can operate within these binaries, right? But all of a sudden, these loud Black people come along and they say, no, wait a minute. We've been here from day one. The freedoms extended to you have not been extended to us. The way that you are able to move throughout this country, throughout the world, is very different from the way that we are able to move throughout this country and world, as evidenced by police brutality, right? So it's, it's very complicated, to really get through, like, why can't y'all just accept this basic truth that the way that y'all were taught about history just isn't right? Because I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into that. They are very psychologically kind of attached to the idea that America stands for a certain thing. And 1776 really means something, like that is very, very important to their identity. So, but I don't think that's an excuse for anything. That may be true. Okay, well, the way y'all were taught, that's the way y'all were taught. We all were, I call it, a victim of those sort of narratives. But, we're adults and we should have the maturity and the brain space to deal with different ideas and evidence of different experiences when they are presented to us. So there's no excuse for us in 2020 to still be sort of explaining, racism is a thing. Sexism is a thing, if you want to take the conversation in that direction. Like we may not all agree on some of the finer points, but there are still a lot of white people who just sort of deny that, the U.S. is wrong in any way. Yeah. And I think that's where we run into problems. We see that in our politics. We see that in the education system, in the court system. We see this everywhere, this kind of inability to, at the very basic level, see things from someone else's perspective. So, yeah, I think that is why they have a hard time with understanding Black history and seeing its importance. It requires a lot of psychological work that I'm not sure a lot of them are kind of quite able to do yet.
You made a lot of good points. And in one of my interviews, the young man, he said, not just America, because we were talking about reparations, and he said, not just America, he's like all of the whites, the Germans, France, because, those countries colonized Africa. And then, of course, we get into the slave trade. But he's like, he went off. But basically, he's like, every white person needs to pay a Black person. Like, all the white people need to give Black people reparations. And I was like, that is a good point, And with the outrage and the laughter, I was like, it's a very valid point. And my parents are from Cameroon, so Central Africa. And it's a very divided country, unfortunately. But those countries, especially West Africa, were colonized multiple times from different European countries.
Yeah. It's reparations definitely gets to be kind of a complicated conversation for a number of valid and invalid reasons, but I think that I don't think people should immediately dismiss it, right? And say that, I never had any slaves. So like, why should I, have to come, have any sort of accountability for something that I never had anything to do with? And so to that, I say, you personally may not have, owned a slave or lynched anybody or anything like that, but you still benefit from those centuries of all of these things happening in the same way that our communities are still suffering from centuries of all of those things happening. So we can't simply say, oh, we'll just wipe the slate clean and everything's, good to go. In 2020, Black people are still contending with the effects of chattel slavery. So it is not unfair to say that white people should still be, quote unquote, paying for the consequences of chattel slavery. If that makes sense. It's not just that, just because I'm born, when I was born and I'm alive today in 2020, that doesn't mean that I just magically am completely separated from the legacy of slavery in the United States. If that were the case, well then, okay, we could say reparations doesn't make any sense. But we know that that's not true. We know that almost everywhere we look, we see the effects of slavery and Jim Crow and, all of those things are still affecting us today. So I think that reparations are necessary. And I don't think it necessarily has to be just a check. People try to like water it down to just like, oh, we'll just write y'all a check and then that's it. Well, slavery was much more than just money. That was, religious degradation. That was psychological degradation. It was sexual violence. There were all kinds of things wrapped up in that. that aren't just going to magically go away if, in theory, you write every Black person in America a check. Because there's really no amount of money that the American government can give us to sort of undo what our great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers went through. You can't put an amount on that to have your children ripped away from you, to have your personhood, your manhood, and your womanhood just, completely trampled over. So I think that we all need to come together and have an honest, come to Jesus moment, as they say about reparations, and how to move forward as a country. We can't move forward unless we have an honest conversation. We can't move forward, like you asked earlier, until white people really kind of come to terms with what the real history of this country is. They invented all of this. They're going to have to be the ones to undo it. Like, y'all came and got us. We were minding our business. Like, y'all invented this whole system.
Like we always do.
We were not bothering y'all. So, to think that the weight of fixing all of this is on us, I think, it's just time out for that. We've been marching. We've been protesting. We did everything they said we should do. Like we went to school. You think about all of the people who kind of stood up for Black citizenship in the Reconstruction era, in the early 1900s. I mean, these were upstanding, educated, proper, Black people. And like, look at where we are in 2020.
Yeah.
So,
Man, I'm loving everything you're saying, and I'm like, I don't know which direction.
Sorry, all over the place. You gotta get me.
I love it. I'm for economic development.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's my mission when it comes to our community. And, that's one thing I've learned recently as far as the reparations. It's not just a check, and Dr. E had mentioned it's like it needs to be a holistic approach. It needs to be
Yes.
a whole package of community resources. And she just gave me the viewpoint as a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an advocate of mental health, but I never was able to correlate those two or put those two concepts together. So I think that's great. I definitely agree with that, because just like when people win the lottery and they run out of money and they're broke again, it's like you don't want to give all these Black people hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we have a different problem, or we're still stuck in that same problem of whatever. So I appreciate you saying that. I agree with that. I think, God, there's so much. I guess I want to talk about intersectionality as a Black woman, because you mentioned sexism and racism.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand a lot of these systems that we have are led by white men, whether it's corporate, all of the corporate industries, oh my God. And then, of course, politics, right? At least the corporations are moving at this point. So we hope for the best. But let's talk about, and I kind of feel like intersectionality is a buzzword lately.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it as a Black woman trying to navigate this white space.
Yes. So intersectionality, the way people use it, this is where social media really is kind of a gift and a curse. Social media gave a whole lot of people access to, terms like intersectionality, and more people should have access to, these terms and these frameworks and all of this theory. They definitely should have access to it. The problem is that people did not do all of the reading. So you have access to the term, you hear the term, and it sounds cool.
That's me. Well, that's not me. But I'm like, that fits me. That word describes me. And then they just run with it.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds nice and they run with it, but they don't realize that years of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's work went into her, coining this term back in 89. So since 1989, we have sort of heard intersectionality kind of tossed about, and definitely in the last, I'm going to say maybe like 8 to 10 years, since social media really blew up. It's just been everywhere. And we see people saying, oh, I am an international, content creator. Intersectional content creator. Or they just throw it out there. And it's like, do you know what that means? It's not a synonym for just like diverse or diversity. Intersectionality is a way of thinking about the various ways that power affect our lives, right? It's thinking about the ways that as Black women, just going back to the way that Dr. Crenshaw was writing about it and thinking about it, the ways that Black women experience racism and sexism, and classism, all of these isms in very specific ways. It's not just, I'm trying to think of a quick example. So like a job interview, like it's a very sort of accessible experience that most people can relate to. So you may have a job interview at a company, and it may not go so well as a Black woman. Well, some people would say, oh, it couldn't have been because you're Black, because this company doesn't discriminate against Black people. And you're like, oh, maybe. And then someone else may say, well, it couldn't have been because you're a woman, because this company doesn't discriminate against women. And you're like, oh, well, I guess not. But intersectionality gives us space to think about the ways that specifically as a Black woman, that job interview may have gone the way that it did, because all white people are not, white men or women, all Black people are not Black men or women. We kind of exist. We have a very specific existence in this world. And intersectionality kind of calls us to question how all of these identities work together and how everything does not carry the same weight at all times, right? Sometimes your socioeconomic status may really come into play in ways that your race or gender doesn't for a particular situation. So intersectionality is a way of thinking about how all of these parts of our identities work together and how they influence just how we have access to things, how job interviews, mortgages, education, healthcare, like all of the things that we think about in the public sphere. Intersectionality helps us think about the ways that it's not just your race or not just your gender or your class or your sexuality. Things work together. So when people say I'm an intersectional whatever, it's just kind of like this. I know what you're trying to say, but that's not really how Dr. Crenshaw meant for the term to be used. So intersectionality is really important, especially as Black women, when we are thinking about how we fit into various social movements, especially like in this moment. We've dealt with this way since Sojourner Truth, since before then, like we have existed in a specific way as Black women. So.
Do you think Black men need to be aware of intersectionality?
Of course. Of course. They came from a Black woman, so yeah.
Say it again.
Like, it's not, like, it's like men should be aware of feminism too. Like, yes, Black men should be aware of intersectionality, of Black feminism, of womanism, of all of these things. No one's asking them to have PhDs in the subject, but they should have a working knowledge of the ways that the women in their lives sort of have to experience the world and the things that affect us in ways that may not affect them. And that's something that I've been really, I'm always thinking about it, but recently there's some things that happened in pop culture that kind of brought all of that back to the forefront. And I've been thinking about it some more. Especially, I'm obviously a Black woman. I'm married to a Black man, and we have these conversations, and sometimes they're very uncomfortable conversations, but it's necessary for us to move forward. Like the same way, me and him as just two individuals have to have that conversation, our community needs to be having more of these conversations because there is division, But that division is not because Black women are speaking up and saying, hey, over here, y'all need to pay attention to some stuff. I don't like it when people try to say Black women are being divisive by like pointing out things that are affecting us. If there's division, it's because we're seen as a distraction. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, we aren't just a distraction. It's not just us being extra by pointing out certain things that affect us specifically as Black women. So yeah, Black men should definitely be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, I like how you stated it, because they need to know how this applies to the women in their lives, right? Be it the wife, the girlfriend, the daughter, the sister, the mother, the aunts. And I think, especially when we get into feminism, because that is a feminine word, like, it's just like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to me, Whereas no, it's like you need to understand and hear the full context of what is surrounded by this word, and not just feminine and masculine, gender, thinking only of gender. And then I do think intersectionality, that's just the extra layer on top of the,
Yeah.
So it will take a brother with a very expansive mindset to be like, okay, let me sit down and listen, and learn as well.
Keyword listen. If I can say that.
You can say anything on this show.
Listen.
Oh man, okay. You mentioned one thing earlier, just a second ago, about I think things just getting lost, similar to Sojourner Truth. And it's one thing when white people negate our history, but recently I've realized more so, unfortunately, with the situation of Breonna Taylor, it really had me reflecting. But I also feel like whether we're a victim or a leader, I just feel like Black women continue to get lost in these movements. And I think even from a historical past, like, why, as a Black person within the Black community, do you think we've kind of negated Black women along history?
I think there are lots of reasons for that. The oversimplification, of course, would be because of sexism, right? Just like worldwide, we seem to have this problem where women are kind of relegated to second class status. Like we come second, the men come first. But I think that it's a bit more complicated than that. I think that specifically in the context of the United States, that's the really, the only thing I can speak on. I know it may not be exactly the same in other parts of the world, but here I can say that when we think about what emancipation meant, right? We just got finished celebrating Juneteenth. After emancipation, you all of a sudden had a whole, community of people who had been told for hundreds of years that they were not citizens, that they were subhuman, that they were not worthy of the respect that you give to a human being. What do you do all of a sudden when you have, quote unquote, freedom? Okay. People felt that to really take advantage of their freedom, they had to become citizens. And citizens, that's not a term that's just about, oh, I'm a citizen, I have a piece of paper, I can vote or whatever. But they saw citizenship as a way to kind of externally express their personhood. I am a citizen, I am a worker, I am a landowner, I am a husband, I am a wife, I am a churchgoer, I am a citizen in this country, the United States. No matter what y'all said before 1865, I am a citizen, I am free. That meant something to people at that time. Now, what happens when, at this time, citizenship is greatly tied to gender? Citizenship is tied to your manhood and your womanhood. When we think about the 15th Amendment that was passed in 1870, all the way through the 19th Amendment that was passed in 1920. 15th Amendment, Black men got the right to vote. 1920, with the 19th Amendment, women got the right to vote. So, yeah, exactly, So when you think about 1870, Black men as a man, I can vote, I can participate in the democracy. That was really, really, really important. And I know it's easy for us to look back on them, with 2020 eyes and kind of see them as like, regressive and, all this stuff. But imagine what they had come from, to be able to vote and hold office in 1870. That was very important. And so it was seen as very crucial for the Black community, for the man, because that's just the world they lived in, right? That it was what it was. For the man to sort of move forward first. It was seen as a priority for Black men to have manhood, to be able to go out and work and earn a living wage, to be able to protect his wife and children from violence, to be able to afford nice clothes. You don't have to go around looking like a slave, like an enslaved person. There were different things that were very important at that moment. So this attitude, of course, carries forward. Like for the Black community to succeed, the man needs to succeed. And then by natural, succession, women will succeed as well. This was kind of the underlying mindset of a lot of things that were happening in Reconstruction on through Jim Crow. Now, we know that if the focus is only on the men, you're missing half the population. So Black women are looking around like, well, okay, we have these children. We are all poor, so both of us have to work. I'm contributing to this family and this community too. Why should I have to be in the background? And once Black women started asking that question, there was a tension that we are still dealing with 150 years later. And that's just a simple truth. And that conversation has, of course, altered and become a little bit more complicated over the years. But as soon as our great-great-grandmother said, well, hey, Buster, I know you're going to go, work, farming and everything to bring home some money for the family, but I'm a laundry woman and I'm washing these white people's clothes until my hands are raw. I have a say, like I matter. I'm having these kids and taking care of these kids. I matter. My labor matters. My worth as a human being matters. It's not just about you getting to walk around here and puff up your chest, because you're feeling like a man now that we're free. So that has kind of, I don't know that we really figured out a way to kind of come together, because it's very important, of course, men are saying, like, wait a minute, I barely got this status. Like, what are you talking about? I got to think about you. I ain't got time to think about you, woman. I'm trying to get out here, like, and, I don't think it came from a place of malice. I'm just saying that their priorities, they were struggling and grasping at something that was largely out of reach because, of what, just of America. Like, so it's kind of complicated. And that attitude kind of led to the founding of the NACW, the National Association of Colored Women, in 1896. They struggled to kind of hold, really, I don't want to say stand up for themselves, but advocate for why their existence. Why did we need all these Black women to come together? When, the men, they taking care of everything. Y'all be fine. Go be pretty. Like, no, like there were issues that were affecting women that the men couldn't quite see because they were handling a whole bunch of other stuff too. So I think that when you think about it from that perspective, like what manhood has meant, what citizenship has meant, what womanhood has meant, I think that's how you get to this really bad situation where Black women have literally been erased from a lot of things, whether it's from history. We have Anna Julia Cooper was brilliant. A lot of people don't even realize that she was writing essentially like feminist theory way back in 1892. We think Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say? So it's like, I think that it's the conversations that we're having now about Black men and intersectionality and all of these things. It's part of a much longer thread of conversations that go back to us trying to figure out how to exist in this country after horrible things were done to us. Like, we're literally trying to invent ourselves as Americans, as citizens, as men and women, after being told that we could be none of those things for hundreds of years. So when Black women are coming along saying, hey, fellas, y'all are ignoring us. Like we got some stuff going on. Why aren't y'all paying attention to Breonna Taylor? Why did it take George Floyd, getting killed? And of course, that was awful. But why did it take, for that to happen, for people to kind of circle back and be like, wait a minute, this young lady was, so it's just a part of this longer conversation of us kind of seeing we have this idea that if the men are okay, then the women will automatically be okay. And I'm not sure that that's true.
Yeah. It's unfortunate too. Yeah. Because I was reading or listening to something recently, and basically it's like Black women, we make sure everyone's okay. Mm-hmm. Right. And when we make sure everyone's okay, they're able to achieve their goals, but then they're not taking us, they're not bringing us along to move further, whether it's our, relationships, career, or whatever. So it's definitely frustrating, to say the least.
It's frustrating and it's hurtful. It's hurtful in 2020 to still sort of hear from our own men, y'all are being divisive, by bringing, like, why y'all trying to say we didn't pay attention to Breonna Taylor? It's about George Floyd now. Well, what do you mean?
Right.
She mattered too. She was a caretaker in her community. Like, why us calling it out? Why is that divisive and not y'all just ignoring her? Like, that's divisive. That's right. The vision of telling us not to ignore. Telling us to ignore, what's happening to the women in our community. Police are killing us too. It's not just about y'all. So, like I say, it's a long-standing kind of like battle that we still have a lot of work to do.
So what are your sentiments on the Protect Black Women? So that's the latest trend.
Yeah. So I get it. Mm-hmm. On one hand, I think that, yes, Black women, Black children need to be protected. We need y'all to protect us. Like, on one hand, like, I get it. Because again, when you think back to what citizenship means in this country, like for white men, for all of the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of them, being a man, you weren't a man if you could not protect what was yours, and we can trouble that we don't have to agree with that, but that's for them. Thinking back to those days, a man protected his farm, his estate, his family, his woman, his children. Like, that's kind of, that was just how they thought. So I don't have an inherent problem with people saying, protect Black women, stop just kind of leaving us out here to fend for ourselves, fend for everybody else, and then we kind of get nothing in return. I get the sentiment behind that. But I also want us to push past that. And I want us to create a world where Black women don't need protecting. Like, that's what I want. Like, I want a world where I can safely go to the grocery store past dark, because sometimes I get off work late and it's dark and I need to go to the grocery store. I want to be able to load groceries into my car without fear of someone mugging me. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't want to live in a world where I have to be protected at every turn, outside my house and in my house. When we look at the rates of domestic violence between Black men and Black women, I mean, it's not looking so great. So I don't want to have to be protected. And that's why the Protect Black Women, like, I get it. I'm behind the sentiment of the hashtag, but I still think it relies too much on accepting that the world is inherently violent and dangerous and awful for us. And I want a world where we don't need protecting. I want a world where I can walk down the street in New York or any major city and not have dozens of Black men yelling at me, calling me out of my name, telling me I have an attitude because I won't acknowledge them or give them my phone number. Like, I want to live in a world where I don't need a man to protect me from other men. I just want that sort of freedom. I think that's what we should be pushing for. But in the meantime, protect Black women.
In the meantime, I'm here for it. No, you're right. And I think that's another thing that's getting lost in context and translation. I think so many people, because of police brutality, because of just violent, abusive behavior, people are looking at the physical aspect of it, which is important, which is needed. But I also feel like it's really about respect, right? Mm-hmm. It's about respecting Black women that you're not in relationship with.
Yes.
Just the fact that I'm a woman, you should respect me, Mm-hmm. And I have a whole pedestal that I can get on when it comes to that concept. But
same.
It's really about respecting Black women outside of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And I keep saying this, whether bedroom, boardroom, in the street, like, respect me as I go out, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that's so hard to comprehend.
You would think, I look at it like this. You know how absurd we think it is when we say, stop killing us, police, or racism is bad. You would think that people wouldn't argue with you when you say that.
You're right.
You would really think that people would be like, you know what, racism is bad. So when we say, like, women matter, or like we say these very simple things, like these very foundational things that have to do with feminism, you would think that men wouldn't argue with you about it, but they do.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of mind-boggling, because it's like, why do I have to go so far as to say, well, what if it was your daughter or your mom or or do I have to be pretty? Do you have to find me attractive in order to feel that you need to protect me or respect me? Like, that's what I want us to get away from. By virtue of me being a woman, a fellow human being, you should care just a little bit, about what happens to me. So, because Black women extend that grace to practically everyone else.
Right.
It hurt me so bad. The story of the young lady who ended up, she was assaulted and murdered, and she had been out there protesting.
Yeah.
Or the trans woman who was beat by Black men, I think it was at a protest. And it's like, y'all are out here protesting the fact that the police are treating you horribly, and yet you turn around and enact violence on a fellow Black person. Like, there's just so many levels.
I get so angry, and I feel like I'm about to cry right now, because it's just like what happened? Like, I thought we were protesting, and when we do stuff like this in public, I do think it makes it hard for white people and other minorities to support the cause. And I'm like, if we can't be peaceful during a protest, like, where can we be peaceful at?
It's tough for me, because I just, like you said, like, it gets so, I struggle to find the words to express how I feel about that, about men enacting violence on Black cis women, trans women, on anybody, on each other.
Right.
We are supposed to be protesting the police and, by extension, the state, all these other systems that enact violence on us. Like, what are we supposed to do with that? And then, like you're saying, it gets even more complicated, because people use that to kind of say that we aren't really worth the trouble, which I feel like that's a cop-out, because we all know humanity is imperfect, right? Like, we know we could go to white communities and we see, there's domestic violence, there's all kinds of stuff going on in white communities too. I think that to ask for Black people to be perfect in order to advocate for them is kind of a cop-out. Do we have some stuff we need to work on? Absolutely. Absolutely. Not making excuses for anything, but and I've encountered that when white people are kind of like, well, oh my gosh, like they got into a fight at the protest. Like, why would I even support that? No one's asking you to support people fighting at the protest. We're asking you to help us stop this police brutality and like this maternal mortality rates and, all this other stuff that's going on. No one's asking you to support all of the dirty, complicated stuff that comes along when huge amounts of people get together, I just feel like, why are you focusing on, the very worst in order to kind of excuse yourself and, quote unquote, keep your hands clean from the movement? Because you know good and well that that's not everybody, whether these two Black people are fighting at this protest or not, that doesn't change the fact that the police are literally murdering us,
That's really good. And like, we don't get the same grace. Mm-hmm. We don't get the same grace. And this might be a little off topic a bit, but I'm not a movie person to begin with. But I know lots of times, like I've never seen any of the Friday movies, right? And I would get a lot of slack, especially growing up. I would get a lot like, you ain't seen that movie? And I'm like, I don't watch stereotypical Black movies because we don't get the same grace that white people do. Like, white people can be anything and everything, but if it's a Black person acting ghetto, all Black people are ghetto, uneducated. It's just bad.
And I mean, just me being me, I really don't care what they think because I'm gonna enjoy what I enjoy. I kind of, and I guess to say that in a smarter way is I really try to decenter the white gaze in my life, whether it's in my work or for pleasure. So like we grew up watching the Friday movies. I identified with, the movies, it wasn't like, for me, it wasn't just stereotypical. Like I have, cousins, like Day, like all of them, like it was very relatable for me. And I remember kind of, I don't know if it was college or grad school. Someone said like, oh, like how problematic, those movies were and how they like didn't like quote unquote Black movies because of that. I'm like, well, I'm not saying that. I know that, there's not a monolith for Blackness. People experience and live their Blackness in very different ways. But I said, well, how much power are you giving white people in your life that you would like not watch things or enjoy things because white people think it's ghetto?
That's good.
And I put the term ghetto in and of itself. Like when we think about the history of that term, it's even problematic.
Yeah.
I'll be like, if you like the movie, why, if you like watermelon and fried chicken, eat watermelon and fried chicken. Like, who cares what white people think about it? Our ancestors survived off of, why feel shame about things that are connected to Blackness just because white people told you it was bad? Like, that's kind of how I view things. And again, I think that the goalpost is always moving. I tell my husband all the time, I say, the goalpost is always moving. You can say, okay, I'm not one of those stereotypical Blacks. I don't listen to that music. I don't speak that way. I don't, take part in that type of pop culture. I'm different. Well, to a whole lot of white people, that doesn't matter. Right. You will still get pulled over and mistreated by the cops.
Right.
Like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think that when we work to decenter whiteness and the white gaze from our lives, that in itself was a very revolutionary thing, because it gives us space to love on ourselves and it gives us space to be ourselves without a lot of extra psychological weight, because a lot of the work of racism and whiteness is psychologically burdening us, giving us feelings of inferiority, giving us feelings of, shame and, just all this extra work you have to do to exist. They don't have to do it. they don't have to worry about people looking at the quote unquote worst of them and judging all white people by that. So if they don't have to do it, why should I? Like we're supposed to be the same. We're on this earth together.
That's real.
I say, and of course, some things, everybody doesn't have to like everything, of course. I'm not saying everybody has to like, Friday movies or Tyler Perry movies. I personally can't stand most Tyler Perry movies, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist just because I don't like them or I find them to be stereotypical and, all of those things. It's just, I think that we can get caught up on the ways that we are different. And that takes us away from all of the ways that we are same and all the ways that Blackness is so beautiful and so different. I mean, you have your highfalutin, high tea, super mega educated, like decked out in luxury brands from head to toe Black people. And then you have, our, beauty supply, like fast food, like it is what it is, Black people. And all of us are beautiful. Like all of it is a part of Blackness. All of it is worth loving and protecting. And we all need to come together to fight these systems that are killing us, whether we have money, whether we golf, or whether we don't have money and we play basketball. We have to kind of, I don't know. I'm just saying, I think that we need to focus on like coming together more often and not worrying about what white people think about us, because they're always going to move the goalposts. Like there's always going to be some different thing that we quote unquote like haven't done or haven't accomplished that dictates whether we get treated properly or not. And yeah, I don't know if that answered the question or anything.
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm over here thinking like, man, I needed Valerie in my life 20 plus years ago.
I'm a mess.
Because I mean, I've definitely evolved as a person, and then, my parents are immigrants too. So that's another layer. But yeah, if I was to learn, I would say in high school, at least high school, to decenter white people, that needs to be a t-shirt. So like just that simple concept, to have that language at that age, I know I would be so far ahead in so many other aspects of my life. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I think there's so much that you said from the beginning. It's just the narration of history that makes us as Black people center white people in everything that we do when we do go to these job interviews. I know when I went natural, my mom didn't like it. And when I was looking for a job, she's like, what are you going to do with your hair? And I'm like, what you see is what you get.
Well, it's in college, so you already know. Like once people hated them, but once they got long, it was okay. But when, the baby stage, it was like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. There was a lot of that. So yeah, but then you have to kind of come to the realization that if it's a job that my natural hair is going to be a problem there, it's probably going to be hell to work there. Yeah. So it is like I say, just there's all these different things that we have to consider and contend with just by nature of being Black, like in this country.
I have 1, decenter whiteness. 2, what's for me is for me. Like,
yes. Because, I mean, your blood pressure would just go down just with those 2 things. There will be so much freedom in just existing. What's for me is for me. Like, I'm going to wear my hair as it grows out of my scalp, and we just have to just live in that truth and just have faith that everything will work out.
God, I feel like there's so much. Anything else on Black women that we should be doing?
I think that we are at a space where I think it's a good time to have a conversation about how men and women in our community are relating to each other and talking to each other, talking around each other. because I think that there are some hurt feelings on both sides. But I don't, it's something that's troubling to me. And I keep saying I can't find the words because I really can't quite find the words to articulate how I'm feeling about this particular moment with police brutality being an issue and us protesting in the streets during a pandemic. Police brutality, and then having Say Her Name be a hashtag, having Protect Black Women be a hashtag.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to process as a woman, especially when you log in online and you see what a lot of men are saying. And it's very frustrating because it's like, you guys can write theses online about how racism affects you and how it's wrong for people to judge you if you have a hoodie on, or, you know, like y'all get it from that perspective. I see that you have the ability to get it, but when it comes to us, all of a sudden, like, oh, she got what she deserved because her skirt was short. Do you not see that that's the exact same thing?
Yeah.
That people say about y'all because of how you dress. Like, you know, it's very frustrating and hurtful sometimes when it's like all of a sudden it goes from thesis level to like kindergarten level when it comes to gender issues. It's like this very strange, I don't know, very strange, I don't know if I can curse, but
yeah.
it's frustrating. I'll say that.
Yeah. It is very disheartening. I've noticed that I've looked at my network a lot closer as to what they're posting and who they're promoting, and what we're laughing at, especially if you're like posting and laughing. I'm like, okay. But because it's like, where is your mindset? You know, where, and especially when I'm having these conversations with brothers that are single and they would like to be in a relationship. But then I see them posting trash, and I'm so disconnected.
Disconnect. And it shows up in the strangest things. It shows up, you know, the whole like they'll use men and then say females in the same post, and then and so it's like it's such a, like I say, these weird little mind games. So it's like you understand that it's weird to say males. You get that it's weird to say males because you never say males. You always say men.
And they'll correct you if you say males.
Yeah. Correct. But somehow you don't understand why calling us females is just a little problematic because the word woman is right there.
You know, I had a call today with a white gentleman, and he was just talking, and he kept saying woman, woman. And I was just like, he gets it. He gets it. and part of me wanted to commend him for saying woman. Yeah. And it's like, no, Michelle, like, you should not commend him for saying woman. But it's so rare that I felt like it needed to be acknowledged too. I didn't, but that's how rare it is, to the point that I noticed it.
And that's sad. That's actually sad that it is so rare to be called woman that you when it does happen, you're like, oh my gosh, like, am I on Mars? Am I, you know, what's going on here? And it's little things like that that really kind of I've really been kind of struggling with. Yeah. It's like, are we not communicating something properly? Or like what's going on? And I try not to, I see a lot of gaslighting and just all this stuff happening. And it's just, I don't know. Like,
it's a couple things. I mean, I think it goes back to the narration, like you said. Like, I remember hearing the word bitch for the first time, and it's a female dog, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that, to me, that's it right there. Mm-hmm. And I was watching a short clip with Mark Lamont and Jeff Johnson, two brothers. Mm-hmm. And this is something I've been harping on too, but the way they had the conversation was just beautiful. But it's like men understand women to be property. Like, what can this woman do for you, right? And it's from a young age. Okay, she's going to do your homework. And then, of course, you're going to have sex. You're going to be in a relationship. Is she cooking? Is she cleaning? Like,
Yeah.
How is this woman going to take care of you? And when men and women, we struggle to have genuine friendships with
Mm-hmm.
each other, because so much of it has been grounded in, as a woman, you're going to get married. And when you get married, you need to take care of your home, take care of your man. So, and it gets into all of these gender roles. And when we're trying to lead up into the so-called marriage, the relationships it gets tangled up.
It is tough. And it is something that I see us making some progress because the young girls are not having it. Like, they are very vocally just sort of being like, how are you here to serve me? And
I'm the prize.
I'm proud of the because that wasn't always. I think sometimes women would kind of say things like that to us, but it was not exemplified. It was not lived. We were not really shown it. And I think that valuing women outside of the labor and the care work that we provide is something that we have to work on as a community. Because on the flip side, of course, men say, y'all only care about us, if we have money, and, y'all only care about us for XYZ. And it's like, but y'all do realize that on average, a lot of y'all don't have that much money. So if we are as shallow and awful gold diggers that y'all say, like, we suck at it because y'all got no money.
That's a good point, because I do talk to some of my guy friends, or should I say my male friends, that I feel are very attractive, educated, good career, a job title. So I'm assuming they're making money. And when I talk to them, they're like, "Oh, I don't have much together." And I'm like, "Bro, we damn near 40. Like, what part?"
What do you think you have to have? And that's why I say, like, feminism and womanism is liberating for men too, and I wish they saw that, because at the root of these movements is seeing men as more than wallets, seeing them as people, seeing relationships as partnerships, true partnerships, and not just these sort of like reciprocal situation where it's like, you give me money and I cook and clean for you. These frameworks allow us to expand how we relate to each other. And that's why it's worth studying. And that's why I wish more men would just kind of sit and think about it instead of just being like, oh, feminism is, just this, whatever. And think about it. Like, I'm sure you're tired of being seen as a walking bank account. That has to be exhausting. It has to suck. You are a human being with feelings and goals and ideas. So what work can you do to kind of dismantle all of these, systems that are oppressing you too? Like, and I don't know that they really see it as advantageous for them to.
I think men are confused creatures. I think that, because as far as the walking bank account statement, I feel like those are women that they're going after, right?
Yes.
So, like, come on now, like, work with me. And I'm like, she dated a ball player, and you don't play basketball. So,
see, yes, you touched on a very interesting thing, because I've kind of noticed that too. It's like, so you go after certain ladies, and there's nothing wrong with those ladies. I mean, I really aspire to that sort of high femme, like, it's not me. But it's like, men go after, like, you hear them sort of like derisively talk about like the IG models and, stuff with the video girl. You go after that and then get mad when she treats you as the men that she's after. I don't know if that made sense, but like, she's looking at relationships with men in a certain way. She's very vocal about that. She didn't have to knew what it was, when you DM'd her, when you asked her out, when you bought, like, you knew, you knew who I was. So why then get mad when she's like, you're going to pay for my time. Like, you're going to buy me this. You're going to buy me that. Like, you're going to pay my rent. Like, you can't sort of act like all women are just kind of out to get you if you're only sort of going after a certain type of woman, because you probably have 5 women over here in your life who would make you a wonderful partner that you don't give the time of day, whether it's because of, size or skin color or what, all this other junk that we have to unpack, and that'll be a whole other podcast. But, but like, I do think that there's a sort of, I don't want to say out of your league stuff that's going on.
No, that's what it is.
I think that sort of interrogating your preferences, use that word a lot, your preferences would liberate a lot of men as well. Interrogate your preferences. Why are you going after a certain type of woman and then beating yourself up and feeling like crap because you feel like you don't quite have all of the things it takes to keep a woman like that, or you're running yourself crazy, driving yourself into the ground, working to get all this money? Like, maybe interrogate why you feel that that's necessary. Or, as I mentioned briefly earlier, like street harassment, like women who obviously are going to work, obviously, in suits, in work clothes, business clothes, going to work, and men will still holler. But it's like, sir, you obviously are not going to someone's job. Why do you think that like, do you honestly think that something productive is going to come out of you bothering this woman as she's like walking to the train? Like, there's just a sort of, like, I'm sure that there may be some women in your life who would be happy to go out with you and talk to you and converse with you. Like, why? Just this idea of preference and sort of like what you deserve.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I stopped listening to this podcast led by a guy or two, and I felt like that was their whole complaint. Like, I'm like, y'all brothers are average, like, you're very average, right?
I think women are aware of our averageness very early. We accept it, we move on, we thrive despite our mediocrity, and I just don't know that men get that same.
But I think, I don't know, it's fascinating to me. I think I kind of feel like I always study relationships, and my experiences have been all over the place. But I so that's why I'm like, out of your league. That's what it is, right? That's exactly what it is. And I do feel like some women like to date out of their league as well. I know sometimes the appeal of, I want to date someone that's making 6 figures. And it's like, okay, but what comes along with that 6 figures? And that can change a little bit now with technology. Mm-hmm. But it's like, what kind of business is he doing? What's coming along with those 6 figures, right? Yeah. And if he is 6 figures, there's a possible chance that other women are throwing, those at him. So you're fighting for attention.
Yes.
And discipline. That's a whole nother conversation, another episode. But so I think there's competition on both ends. Yes. Men and women, no one's exempt. Like, everyone can get it. Like, everyone needs to audit themselves.
Like, just throughout our community, there are just so many important conversations that need to be happening. Because like, we're talking about desire and preference. We're talking about like violence, and like, there's just all of these different things that are going on. And I don't know, like, that's way above my pay grade. I don't know how to foster these conversations and really get us kind of on the same page. But I just know that it needs to happen. Absolutely. I do feel like we're kind of talking around each other, and I think there are some underlying resentments that perhaps we haven't really dealt with. We need some therapists. We need like some community. Like, we need a lot. But I haven't given up on us. I don't give up on us. But I think that there are some hard truths that we are going to have to come to terms with. And we haven't dealt with it since emancipation, since 1865, since we all were trying to figure out how to live in this country safely and with dignity within our community. We still have not quite figured out how to get on the same page as men and women about these things. So
okay, because we can go to another rabbit hole, but I also feel like some of that, I feel like every time Black people try to build community, whether it's an actual community like Tulsa, Greenwood, all that stuff, or the Black Panthers, a community of people doing good to our neighborhood, our community, I always feel like the white person comes in and they tear it down. And, even the concept of the projects, if you learn about the concept of the projects, that's one thing we talk about. Was it Nixon or Reagan? I don't know. The drugs, the war on drugs, that's another thing. So it's just like people don't want us to be together. And then that, I just stay angry.
Yeah. Creating, and we have a right to be angry. I don't see anything wrong with anger. There are some people who say that anger is, useless and this, that, and the other. I say no. Anger is a valid human emotion. It's something that you should sit with and deal with. You don't stew in it. You don't just stay there. But anger can be used for good. It's not inherently negative. We have the right to be angry about the way we've been treated in this country. That doesn't make you a bad Black person because you're mad. You have a right to be mad. So I think that the destruction of, Tulsa, of Rosewood, Greenwood, all these communities, I think that this destruction is very purposeful because they know, white people know, that our unity is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Our talent, our intelligence, our work ethic, all of these things are powerful beyond measure. And they know that. And that's why every time we get off on our own, mind our business, build our own little towns, we're not bothering y'all. Mm-hmm. Literally minding our own business, making the best of a bad situation. And here y'all come with nooses and rifles and bombs, like literal bombs, like what happened in Tulsa. And what happened in, I want to say 1985 in Philly with the MOVE bombing and, with drugs, like there's all these moments throughout history where we can say like, y'all literally keep us 3 steps behind, which is why I say like reparations, it's not about you being alive today and you never owned a slave. You directly benefit from bad things that are still happening to us even now. So as a country, we're not talking about you, individual white person. We're talking about as a country, there has to be a reckoning and reparations made because we can't just magically catch up after centuries of being held down. And even if you're trying to say, okay, well, slavery ended, 1865 and, Jim Crow more or less ended in the 1960s. We'll say that. Well, even since the 1960s, if we were going to ignore everything before then and we just start from the 1960s, do you honestly think that Black people have had a fair shake in this country since the 1960s? So even then, reparations are still owed for things that have been done since then. So it's just, yes, I think that there has been very purposeful white negative intervention in Black progress in this country. That cannot be denied. You can't deny that when you look at the stories of Tulsa and Rosewood. You can't deny. These were Black middle-class communities that were literally destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth because white people just could not stand to see Black people thriving. And that's the long and short of it. I don't see how anyone could argue with that point.
Facts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a basic fact. I mean, they were literally destroyed. So, I think that as Black people, how do we respond to that, right? So we acknowledge these facts. We acknowledge, look, throughout history, we've tried every avenue. We've tried to behave, we built our own businesses. We did all the things. And yet here we are. So how do we move forward? What does white allyship mean? What does Black entrepreneurship and Black capitalism how does that factor into everything? What about our health, mental, physical, and spiritual? Like, we have lots of questions that we have to ask if we're going to move forward. And we also have to figure out how white people are going to factor into us moving forward. Because like I said, we didn't invent this problem, so it's not on us to solve it by ourselves. They are going to have to, figure some stuff out too in order for us to move forward. So, yeah.
Man, I love this conversation. I love this conversation. Like, when you were talking, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this episode to every Black person. You don't know what to say? Play this episode. Just send it to your white ally. And then they can come back and discuss.
Well, I am thoroughly enjoying it. Thoroughly.
Oh, man. Anything else? Like, I mean, I don't know if you just need to, maybe you can do your own speed round. What do we need to know or just look into, or resources?
I just want us to, just as a historian, as a history nerd, I want us to engage with history responsibly.
Oh.
Because our ancestors left us the blueprint, okay? Our ancestors gave us tools and gave us knowledge. We just choose not to engage with it. So you see, sometimes people do this whole, like, I'm not my ancestors, you can get these hands type stuff. No, that's not what we do. That is not what we do. We don't do that. Like, our ancestors are the reason why you're able to sit here and enjoy, all the things that we enjoy. We don't disrespect the ancestors. So I want us, if nothing else, if people like read about, what I do with history, I want us to learn how to engage with history responsibly. Look at what you can learn from what our forebears left us, and let's figure out how we can move forward. I'm not saying that they were perfect. I'm not saying that they, were all knowing beings. They were human beings just like us. But they managed to create an entire community and society after enduring horrible trauma. Coming across the ocean, like, they endured so much and managed to create this beautiful Black American culture that we have. So let's learn from that and do them justice in moving forward. But when we don't engage with history responsibly, and it's just this kind of like, we just, I don't know, condense it to weird like YouTube clips and like conspiracy theories on social media. Like, no, like, really sit back and think about what our ancestors went through and what they taught us, and figure out how can we move forward as Black Americans living in the United States in 2020, surrounded by white people, because we're still only 12% of the population. I think last time I checked,
13, yeah,
13% of the population. So, we still have some work to do to figure out how we can survive and thrive in this country. I have faith that we can do it. And in some ways, we're going to need white people to get on board with that. Because like I say, it's not like we're not even 50% of the population here. So there are going to be some things that they're going to have to come to terms with in their own communities. We can't wait on them. But I mean, that's just an honest assessment from my perspective of what's going to have to happen. But I want us to do that. I want us to engage with history responsibly and really do our reading, and learn to communicate and talk to each other across our differences. And that goes for me too, because sometimes I get frustrated. My husband was telling me, he was like, you get really frustrated with people when they're not as woke as you. And I was like, what you mean? But I thought about it. And he was right. He's right. He was like, sometimes you gotta like step back and remember that you read this stuff all the time. Like, this is kind of what you do. Everybody's not there yet. So you need to, like, break down a little bit. So, I have to eat a slice of humble pie. I have to do that often, but that's how we hold each other accountable. Like, it just is what it is. So
yeah, I love it. How can people find you?
I am on the internet at Lynnfieldhistorical.com. I'm on Instagram at Lynnfield Historical. I'm on Facebook at Lynnfield Historical. You get the point. Just look for, Lynnfield Historical Consulting. You'll find me. Feel free to send me a message. You can email me at lynnfieldhistorical@gmail.com. If you have questions about history or book recommendations or anything. I've been posting on Instagram since this is Pride Month. I've been just trying to feature like Black LGBTQ people throughout history that have something to teach us about, how to navigate what we're going through right now. So I'm just kind of trying to encourage people like, hey, do a little Wikipedia search on this person or check out this book. So that's how I've been trying to use my platform recently, just to encourage people to go and learn on their own and not look for me or any other historian or any other person on social media, because I'm just a girl with an Instagram account at the end of the day. But like, don't look for me to explain to you why James Baldwin or, Audre Lorde are important. You go find out why they're important. You go read what they wrote and what they left behind for us. That's what I mean by use history responsibly. Like, go read. They left us so much. Just go engage with it. So, but yeah, that's where you can find me. Just look for Lynnfield Historical Consulting. Yeah, you'll find me.
I love it. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes. Oh, Valerie, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this so much. I really did. I hope we can connect in the future. And
yeah, we're going to do this again. We're going to give them a part 2, 3, and 4. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Valerie Wade. I hope you learned a lot of things, because I was blown away. And, talking to her, I was like, we can do part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10. Okay. But no, I just learned so much. Please go follow her. I think she is a precious jewel. And it amazes me how she was able to take this information and turn it into a career and blossom at it. And she is so important. And people like her that takes the time to learn about Black history, educate Black history. She's preserving our history. So please support her. Go to her website, lynnfieldhistorical.com. Follow her on social media. That was another thing that I've liked, whether it's with her or people in general. There's just been a lot of education on social media lately, whether it's historical or just surrounded by recent events. It's a lot of good stuff. So that's a shout out to Valerie and everyone else that's educating us on social media. So remember, I believe in you. Personal connection leads to an influential network. Thanks for networking with Michelle.